We're more convinced of our own unworthiness than we are of God's power. And I know that's been my story for most of my life. And certainly would be my family's story. And I don't want it to stay that way. I want to live convinced that God can do miracles. Like Tom said, and as you know already, I love telling stories. And I love telling stories from Bongo Land and wherever, but actually to have stories from where we are is even better. And when I was here in November 2009, and when I went from here, I went across to Troon to speak. And the previous year, I hadn't heard, when I was here, I don't think I'd heard the end of this story. In October 2008, I was in Troon, and some friends of mine over there said, well, look, we know of this couple. We don't know them, but we know of them. The husband is dying with cancer. He's 42. He's been in Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. They've removed various organs to try and stop the cancer spreading, but they failed and they've thrown him back again. And as far as we understand, he's only got a few days to live. Would you be willing, if we were able to, if his wife says yes and the hospital says yes, would you be willing to go over with him to pray for him? So I said, yeah, fantastic. Well, she found out the phone number of the family, and actually they'd sent him home for a weekend, for his last weekend with his family. 42 years old, kids about 8 and 10 years old, I guess. And he was at home looking like the spirit of Christmas passed him, and he looked like there was death warmed up, walking around with his pole on wheels, with his saline drip. He was about 5 stone, I should think. Grey, gaunt, dying, looked awful. And so I sat on a settee with him, and I said, Graham, so what's the story? And he said to me, they took out my gallbladder, and they took out a kidney, and they took away part of my liver and part of my colon. And he said, in the end, they just stitched me back up and said, we can't stop it. There's nothing we can do. Go home, have a weekend with your family. So I prayed for him, and I heard myself saying, again, this is something that scares the living daylights out of me, if I'm honest. But I'm really glad God does it, because I remember saying to God, I want you to do it. God, I don't want to process everything that you tell me, because actually, so often when we get a chance to process it, we can process some of the life out of it. And I sat with Graham that night, and his wife Lynn was just across the room, and my friend Margaret had taken me there. And I said, Graham, I heard myself saying, Graham, you'll wake up tomorrow morning feeling sufficiently better to tell Lynn, or for yourself, to call the hospital and say you're not going back. And I thought, no. Why? I'm still in Troon tomorrow. One of the joys about what I do is that, you go somewhere and you hit no. That's why I'm glad I've never been a missionary in one place for a long time. Because I can go somewhere and then somebody else gets left to pick up the pieces, like David and Maggie or Tom and Marjorie, But I'm here for a few days, so I didn't hear any more. I went back from here, November 2009, so 13 months later, I went back to Troon. And Margaret said to me, my friend who first took me to see this guy, Graham, she said, do you want to go and see Graham? And I said, well, as long as he's not in a pot on somebody's mantelpiece, or in a box in the ground, I'd love to go and see him. Went round to his house. He wasn't home. He was at work. Apparently they're building an Edinburgh dungeon here, is that right? Like the London dungeon. The thing. Yeah. And there's a Burke and Hare ride. Graham invented that ride and was building it. And so he'd been at work, got home to Troon about 10 o'clock, walked into the room. I was glad I was in his house, because if I'd walked past him in the street, that's what I would have done, walked past him in the street, I wouldn't have recognised him. Fit, healthy, full head of hair, black hair as well, not even wispy grey hair, which is probably what I grow back in. I lost my hair through chemo. And I sat down and said, Graham, what happened? He said, well, I woke up the next morning. And he said, I told him in the hospital, I'm not going back. He said, 6 weeks later, we went on a 6-week round the world holiday. How many days to live? And I said, wow, that's fantastic. I said, what else happened? He said, the hospital would often ring up and say, please come back, you know, we need to scan you, you're dying. He says, well, actually, I'm kayaking in France this weekend. I don't have time to come in. Or we're trekking across the mountains as a family. You know, I'm actually a bit too busy to come in to die. And he said, finally I gave in and I went over. He said, I came back over here and he said, they x-rayed me and they scanned me and they blood tested me and everything else. He said, and then I went back for the results. He said, the doctors looking at my scan, as I was saying, but I took your gallbladder out. I took your kidney out. I took half of your colon away. He said, I got it all back. So he didn't, I was like, yeah, supernatural liver, yeah, fantastic.